what is the absolute worst game that you ever played? Maybe you thought of a game that was disappointing, or maybe you thought of a game that is filled with bugs and glitches. Although a few games I personally don't really like came to mind, I decided to find the definitive answer. I found a list of the top 100 lowest rated games on Steam, and I'm gonna play them all to find out which game I personally think is the worst. Now let's spin the wheel and get ready to go dumpster diving. Batman trademarked Arkham Origins Blackgate-Deluxe Edition? That's disappointing. This time we aren't getting right into it because this game deserves some backstory. For those who don't know, the Batman Arkham series has you taking the role of the world's most famous orphan as he dresses up as a bat and beats up everybody. As a kid, I loved the Arkham games because they captured a level of immersion that most other video game adaptations couldn't. When you're patrolling the streets of Gotham, it feels like you're exploring a vast city full of rich history. When you piece together a crime scene or solve a riddle, you feel like you're actually tracking down and outsmarting your enemies. When you finally discover a criminal's lair, you don't just run in there throwing haymakers. Instead, you have access to a wide variety of tools and environmental objects that you can use to stealthily take down your enemies, like your grapple hook, explosive gel, and tons of batarangs. But these gangs aren't just gonna sit there and let you take them down. Instead, they learn and adapt to your tactics. If you spend too much time on a ledge, they'll destroy it. If you scam them too much, they can scramble your tech and eventually track your location. And if you find yourself surrounded by a gang, that's where the fun truly begins. The Arkham series features some of the most fluid and responsive combat ever. At least that's what Kid Jito thought at the time. Add in some of the most unique boss fights I've ever played, and you have a game that's still incredible even today. But apparently that still wasn't enough. So when Batman Arkham Origins was set to release in 2013, Warner Brothers hired Armature Studios to create a spin-off for handheld devices to coincide with the launch. Armature Studios, a team mainly composed of people working on the Metroid Prime series, attempted to take the Batman mythos and port it to consoles in a way that built upon their Metroid history while also staying true to what makes Batman games so much fun to begin with. Armature Studios spent nearly 2 years building everything from the ground up with the same voice actors, stylized graphics, and they even worked with Warner Brothers to make sure that the lore of the game was canon. I mean, come on, it's Warner Brothers. They would never just leave one of their most successful ideas to die. The game starts off innocently enough as Batman, voiced by Roger Craig Smith, is sitting on a rooftop surveying Gotham when Catwoman breaks into a building with some classified information. On the one hand, this is exactly how I want a Batman game to look. Between the shifting vertical bars on the main menu that display different images, the stylized animation in the cutscenes, and the overall dark gritty undertone, it feels like I'm playing a Batman comic. But at the same time, the animators made some weird choices. When Catwoman is escaping, there's these random flashes of yellow and vertical bars on the screen that feel really out of place. Batman's PNG then floats down in the goofiest way possible before the two are surrounded by at least 6 guards. Batman walks up to 2 of them and flashes his cape at them, I guess, which makes them drop their weapons while Catwoman takes the opportunity to bounce. Now, let's play a quick game. What do you think these guards do next? Do they A, go after Catwoman to retrieve the information they're paid to protect, B, call in reinforcements since Batman can apparently one-tap people with his cape, or C, go try and beat up the crazy guy in the bat costume? That's right, they picked door number 3, which means we're immediately getting thrown into our first combat section. Just like in the previous games, you only really have access to a punch and counter attack to start. But unlike the fluid combat of the previous games, the combat here is clunky and delayed. Since the game is set in 2.5D, it's really easy to accidentally smack an enemy out of bounds, leaving you unable to do anything but shadow box right over them. And no matter how hard I tried throughout my hours of playing this game, I could never figure out the timing on the counter. Either I pressed the button too early and I took damage despite Batman clearly blocking the attacks, or I pressed it too late, got punched in the face, and then I emoted. The good news is that since the game is in 2.5D, you'll usually only have a couple of enemies attacking you at a time. The bad news is this makes combat feel tedious. Aside from a few fights where the combat feels fluid and is genuinely fun, most of the time you're stuck waiting for the enemies to approach you one-on-one. You'd think that the stealth mechanics might be enough to make up for that, and you'd be wrong. The first stealth section has you attempting to take down 3 armed guards, but the issue is that the game doesn't give you any stealthy way to take them down. If you try to grab the guards using the middle platform, it will immediately alert the other 2. If you use the ledges on the left or right to grapple away, the guards will instantly spot you and open fire. At least that's what I thought, until I grappled right through their sightlines and they didn't care. From what I've read, the developers added sightlines as a way to make stealth easier in 2.5D. But what's the point of adding sightlines if they don't actually match up with what the guards actually see? To make things worse, the game straight up removed a lot of Batman's stealth options like the double takedown, meaning there's some instances where you have no choice but to take damage. Sometimes you can get spotted surrounded and shot at by enemies you can't change your camera angle to see, while other times you can knock out a guy right next to his friend. It feels like stealth was an afterthought here, shifting the focus from sneaking through the shadows towards just punching the bad guys in the face. Not only does this go against what I love about Batman as a character, but it's also just boring to spam the same 2 buttons until you win. Anyway, back to the story. After chasing and eventually catching Catwoman, the game cuts to a few weeks later as Batman and Gordon discuss a recent explosion at Blackgate prison. Batman then breaks into the prison and meets up with Catwoman, who tells him that Penguin, Black Mask, and Joker are keeping the guards hostage. Teaming up, the two then devise a plan to take down the criminals and save Gotham. It's at this point that the game opens up into 3 different areas, each one tied to an objective and a major criminal in Gotham. I'll admit, this is a pretty cool idea. Since Armature worked on Metroid games in the past, you can see what the intention is here. You go to one area, explore until you hit a roadblock, then go to another area to find some gadget that you need to progress, rinse and repeat. The problem is I kept getting lost. Almost every single room in this game is coated in the same dreary dark color palette that makes each room nearly indistinguishable from each other. And while there is a map, it's hard to plan out your paths when everything looks and feels exactly the same. You could argue that this is because the game is set in a maximum security prison, but Batman Arkham Asylum, which came out years earlier, managed to feel far more intuitive in its design. Here it feels like I'm just stumbling around blindly until I happen to find whatever I need to move forward, which more often than not is right next to the roadblock. I mean, look at this. What's the point of the laser room if the button to turn off the lasers is right next to it? Between the confusing map and the constant buttons that force you to go 10 seconds out of your way just to push them, there's no real incentive to explore anywhere. I feel like the developers knew this because they tried to add collectibles, but I wasn't motivated to find them. Unlike in the other Arkham games, the detective aspect has been heavily toned down. You still have access to the detective mode, which allows you to highlight any nearby objects of interest, but it's unreliable. More often than not, it gets stuck on without highlighting any nearby objects, which forced me to restart the game. Even the optional objectives feel like they were downgraded. Instead of cleverly hidden trophies and riddles, you can just scan random objects to piece together why Blackgate exploded. Sure, it sounds cool, but there's no real indication of where these objects actually are, even if you're standing right next to them. I mean, look at this. Would you have known to scan this? And sure, you could argue that finding Batman's gadgets is also an incentive to explore, but they're not even placed in a way that's difficult or fun to get to. And why is all of Batman's super secret proprietary technology randomly sitting in a maximum security prison in boxes labeled Wayne Technologies? Then later on, you go through an entire vault filled with high-level security to pick up glue. I spent an hour bypassing all this security for glue. But the Batclaw? Nah, that's just lying around. Maybe I'm just being overly critical here, but for a series that prides itself on immersion, having key items randomly scattered across the map like this is a really odd choice. As you explore Blackgate, you'll randomly be stopped to fight through several of Batman's villains, ranging from lesser-known foes like Bronze Tiger all the way up to the Joker himself. Most of the fights, like Solomon Grundy, can be beaten in around 10 seconds. Seriously, even most of the so-called major bosses like Black Mask get taken out with one hit. There are a few fun exceptions, like chasing the Joker around in the worst Duck Duck Goose game ever, or dodging between cover while Deadshot tries to snipe you. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to how awful the final boss fight against Catwoman is. The first phase isn't too bad since it's literally a reskin of the Bronze Tiger fight from earlier, but this second phase, absolute garbage. You're supposed to counter as soon as the real Catwoman attacks, but since you're stunned, your counter's delayed. Not only that, but my inputs kept getting dropped, forcing me to spam the counter button just to make sure it actually worked. And if I countered too soon, the real Catwoman would just pop up and bonk me over the head. Oh, and sometimes she'd just straight up ignore my counter and punch me in the face anyway. How is this fair? I spent way longer on this fight than I care to admit before finally giving up and just Googling the ending cutscene. And after hours of fighting through Blackgate and taking down Gotham's biggest criminals, what do you get as a reward?
Huh, great. What do I win?
A cutscene of the final boss you fought easily escaping.
What?
Get out! Everybody get out!
What was the point of any of this? As someone who loves the Batman Arkham games, I'll admit, I might be a little biased, but even that bias isn't enough to save one of the most disappointing games I've played so far, second only to Sid Meier's Starships. You can tell a lot of love and effort went into this game with just how cool the game looked, at least most of the time, and there were a few moments where the combat was genuinely fun, but in my opinion, there's absolutely no reason to play Batman Arkham Origins Blackgate over any other game in the series. It's not the worst game I played so far, in fact, in terms of production quality, it's probably one of the best. But at the end of the day, I just can't rate it highly because wandering aimlessly around a prison for hours just isn't fun. Anyway, I'll see you guys again next time. Peace out.